Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are here with Saraciea Fennell, and she is the author of Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed. And hey, we both have the same copy. And she is um, gracious enough to be part of our 9th annual Latino Book Festival this year. So thank you so much, Saracia, for coming and joining with us today. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So I'm going to give the viewers some information about you. So basically, Saracia J. Fennell is a Black Honduran writer and the founder of the Bronx Is Reading. She is also a book publicist who has worked with many award-winning and New York Times bestselling authors. And Fennell sits on the board of Latinx in Publishing, as well as on the advisory board of People of Color in Publishing. And she lives in the Bronx with her family and dog Oreo.
Yes,
You're a busy lady, aren't you?
very busy, very busy.
Seems like you just have like several jobs there.
I do. And someone asked me a couple of years back, they were like, you do so many things. And I said, I do, but they kind of all feed into each other because it's all sort of rooted around books and literacy and, activism, right? Really trying to raise underrepresented voices when it comes to literature, but also within the publishing industry. So to me, it all seems like the same thing, just all of these different little fancy titles. But I feel like I'm approaching the industry from as many corners as possible to help affect change. Because I think many of you know, or maybe you don't know, but publishing is one of the slowest moving industries when it comes to change, especially when it comes to like diversity within the industry. I feel like this is not a new issue, it's not a new problem. Publishing knows that they are lacking diversity and lacking several stories. There are so many more, stories that need to be told. But yeah, I can go off on a tangent on that topic, so I'll turn it back over to you, so we can get the discussion started.
Well, I was given this book as a gift. The Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed. And I wanted you, if I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the title of the book. What made you
Yeah.
choose that title?
Yeah, Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed is actually inspired by the wonderful Gloria Azandua's Borderlands book, and it's sort of taken from a quote that is in the book, and basically, I wanted this anthology to subvert stereotypes, to talk about all of the things that are considered taboo in our community, right? Whether that's like religion, identity, colorism, anti-Blackness, whatever it is, right? There are several different topics depending on culturally which part of the region of, the Latin American countries you come from. There are certain things we talk about and certain things we don't, things that you kind of just close the door on it and pretend it doesn't exist. And having Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed, it's like, no, we are going to speak our truths, right? And nothing can tame us. And I really just feel like it was the perfect title. I wish I could credit coming up with it, but I was talking with my literary agent. We were at a writer's retreat, and I kept thinking like, this is the tone of the book, and like, we really need something that's just going to like capture. And she's like, what about, she's like, when I think about this anthology, I think about Gloria Anzaldúa. And I was like, Gloria Anzaldúa, of course, Borderlands, of course. And then immediately we both were just like nodding, like that is the title, that's it. And then really quickly, I want to mention the subtitle,
Yes.
15 voices from the Latinx diaspora. And I want to talk about that for a moment, because I think if you are a descendant, a Latin American descendant, you know, especially living in the US, there's this certain portrayal of what a Latin American person is supposed to look like according to media and TV and etc. And that person never usually looks like me. And so when you know, when we were going back and forth with the publisher about a subtitle, I said, you know, we have to have diaspora in there. We knew we wanted 15 something, you know, 15 writers or 15 whatever, but I was like, no, I have to have diaspora in there, and it must be next to the term Latinx, because we all do it, right? If you are living in the US, we all think, oh, I know what a Latinx person looks like. And they generally don't look like, you know, us, whoever you are, right? You're probably like, you know, you have brown hair, you're probably like, oh, I'm thinking of someone who has blonde hair, blue eyes, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so I said, but once you put diaspora in the title, it automatically makes you think about expanding what the community looks like and who gets the representation. And so I just felt like between that title, Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed, and then adding that subtitle, it just kind of encapsulated everything that I was trying to, you know, portray with this wonderful book.
Yeah. No, and that's what I loved most about your book, because I don't think people understand how diverse the Latinx community is. And
Yes.
you know, and it's these stereotypes that this is what, you know, a person who's Latino is supposed to look like, or and it's like, no, you know, I mean, we look like everyone else. We look like
Exactly.
everybody, and it's okay,
Exactly.
you know? Yeah, and it doesn't make us less Latinx or more so. So, yeah, so your story was actually the first one that I read, because that's
Oh,
what I love
yay.
about anthologies, because you have all these different authors, so you
Mhm.
don't have to start from the beginning, right? And so
Yes.
your story is half in, half out, orbiting a world full of people of color. And I
Yes.
was like, oh, wait, half in, half out, because I'm half American and I'm half Mexican. And so I have
Mhm.
two different countries, two different languages. And I was like, that's my story. And so,
Yeah, yeah.
so
And
I
you know,
read it.
it was just so interesting to me because I kept thinking about, you know, what time period in my life I wanted to write about, and I kept going back to when I was young and you know, growing up and being around people of color, like, you know, just it was the natural thing. I never, you know, paid attention to say like, oh yeah, I'm Honduran, like, you know, like I didn't realize that until I was taken out of the environment that, you know, showcased all of these wonderful, diverse individuals. And I ended up in foster care, for those of you who haven't read the essay yet. And, it, you know, I was living with a white foster family and missing all of these wonderful things from my home. And I attended a school that mostly had a white population, and it was like you know, being confused with another, you know, black looking student in the school, and then, you know, leaving that place and going to the Bronx, where it was at the time in the 80s and 90s, it was largely Puerto Rican, and there were also a large Dominican population coming in, but everyone's like, oh, you must be Puerto Rican. And so I felt like I was having this identity crisis at I was like 8 or 9 years old, and I'm like, I have no idea what's happening, you know? And so I feel like growing up in the US, there's always this you know, when you're in groups of people, when you're in spaces with other people, they always want to know like, where are you from? You know, it's like, who are you repping? You know, whether it's like, what town do you come from, or, you know, what's your culture, what's your ethnicity, what's your religion, like whatever it is, right? If you live in the US, and really I guess anywhere in the world, you are identified by the groups that you belong to. And that's something that I had to like really sit and think about when I was writing my essay, because it was like, wow, I'm surrounded by, you know, a bunch of people of color again, and I'm being told that I'm Puerto Rican. And then, you know, later I find out actually I'm not Puerto Rican, you know. Right. And so that's the same face I made, because we
Yeah.
all have this sense of we want to belong. We want to figure out like what group do we belong to? Who are my people? Right? We say these catchphrases all the time, like, okay, I found my people, right? Whether it's nerd culture or whatever. So we're always looking for that connection. And for me, I felt lost as a kid at that age. And I feel like most people around that age, right? I know that they say like in your teen years is really your coming of age years, but for me, I'm like, no, it's actually your middle grade years. Like you're discovering like who am I as a person? Where do I come from? You start to, figure out that you're the type of clothes you want to wear, the way you want to be addressed. Like we should call middle grade coming of age. It shouldn't really be YA, because in YA we're changing again, right? And so it's just this whole thing where I wanted people to see throughout my essay that it was okay for me to like, sure, have these projections from society placed on me, but I had to go and do the research, and I had to confirm like, okay, am I actually Puerto Rican? Am I actually Honduran? Okay, I'm Honduran for sure. What does that mean? Where do my people come from? What are our customs? Do I feel comfortable with certain practices that we do, and etc.? Because I think that empowers you to figure out how you want to navigate the world. And so I like to tell people that it's okay for you today to identify as one thing, and tomorrow you can identify as something completely different. In 2016, maybe 2015, 2016, I kept hearing the term Afro Latina, and I was like, finally, like a term that literally describes me, right? Like I'm Latina, you see me, I have those, Afrocentric appearances and everything. And I said, this is finally like perfect for me. And then everything I was seeing in the media, all of the Afro Latinas did not look like me. They had a looser curl pattern, or, straight hair. They were more light skinned on the color wheel. And I was like, oh, wow, well, that person actually doesn't, really look like me. And I started to think like, I don't know if I feel comfortable identifying as an Afro Latina. But what really changed for me was when I did a MFA program, and I was interested in writing Honduran inspired speculative fiction. So like looking up myths and stuff like that, and etc. And a lot of them are kind of the same, right? If you come from a Central American country, all the myths are basically the same, which is fine. But I was like, maybe I'll find, a Honduran writer who maybe like put a Honduran twist on something, right? And so I couldn't find any. I found zero Honduran writers who were writing speculative fiction, and it blew my mind. And I said, well, I keep finding like this is a Latina inspired fantasy. This is a Latinx inspired fantasy. And then I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, okay, this is like Mexican mythology, which is, like I said, Central American, maybe a little similar. I found like Dominican inspired stuff, Puerto Rico, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, wait a minute, all of these other countries are having their day in the sun. Why can't a Honduran writer have theirs? And so I decided the representation isn't there. So I'm a writer who is Honduran. I actually need to identify this way. One, to just reclaim that space within the writer industry, right? When I was saying in the beginning, after you introduced me, where I was saying it's sorely underrepresented still, I said, you know what, I need to identify this way because I cannot be the only Honduran writer out there. But then twofold, I knew this book was coming out, and I said, okay, I have to make sure I represent for my Hondureños, and like, they'll see like, oh, there's a Honduran writer. I'm definitely gonna go buy this book because it's so rare. It's such a rare occurrence. And so I wish I could have like written a second essay to go with that initial essay, half in, half out, orbiting a world full of people of color, because I'm still orbiting the world and honestly still looking for my place in it. I keep looking to media. where's the Honduran representation? You know, we're one of the fastest growing groups in the US, right? Just during the pandemic, there were several people crossing the borders to get here, and no representation. And I'm like, there's still so much work to be done.
Exactly. There really is. And that's what was exciting about your book, because um, you have all these great authors that you're working with. And I'm just wondering, like, what made you decide to do an anthology? What was
Yeah,
it with that,
absolutely.
the fact that you wanted the work that you were doing in your MFA program, or?
So the idea did spark from my MFA program, and I had originally wanted to do a like speculative fiction anthology, and I was really like, okay, we're gonna find all these wonderful myths and stuff and like fables from Latin American countries and retell them with a modern twist. And this was around the same time that the election with he who shall not be named was, all in the media. And I felt like every 5 minutes it was, you know, everyone's a Mexican and Mexican are bad people, stuff about black people, stuff, children's in cages. And I was just like, what is
Everyone.
happening? I was like, wow, whoa, this cannot be a period of time that I am living through. And I started to think back about like, you know, what what resources are out there. When I think of resources, I always think of book recommendations, right? I'm always like, you're going through something, here's a book for you to read. And I'm like, what book is out there that I could recommend to young people? So both who are in, right, the Latinx community, but even those that are outside of the Latinx community who need to know that we are not some, stereotypical whatever this man is, blurbing out on television, that it's not true. So I'm like, what resources can I provide people? Because I want to be able to share books with people of all ages to show that we are real 3D people with intersectionalities. We have feelings too, and we exist. Please don't stereotype us. And what I kept coming across was a lot of wonderful fiction stuff, which I loved. I truly loved. But then I started to think, most people will continue to think our lives are fictional. They will continue to think like, oh, I read a book about that, but it was fiction, so it can't be real. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I need to rethink the anthology that I want to do. And so a lot of these names, like Elizabeth Acevedo, she was on my list for one of the books that I was going to be recommending. Like, read this, see fully realized, wonderful Latin community. And then I decided, okay, well, I'm sure Elizabeth has something that she probably wants to talk about, right? And her essay talks about agency, right? Just the right to reclaim that here on
Yeah.
American soil, right? And like, what does that mean? She talks about being in therapy, right? Both like personally, but then also like her relationship with her mother, and the two of them unpacking things from their two separate childhoods. And I just found that to be so fascinating, right? And so I started to like list out a bunch of people, like, okay, who else would make for a really wonderful piece? Meg Medina, who has written many YA books about many different topics. Lillian Rivera, who also comes from the Bronx. And so I definitely was like, I need to have another Bronx person. And so I started to pull together a list of all of these wonderful dynamic writers. And I said, I know each of you have something to say. We talk about Marco Shiro. They are the person who opens up the anthology. And the title of their essay is Eres un Pocho, right? And I just found that to be a very powerful title. And then you read the piece, Mark is a transracial adoptee, and that is just a story I've never heard before, whether it's been in fiction or in real life. And so I said, wow, here is a person who is searching for their roots, right? And their whole entire life, And I'm like, that was also me. That was my journey when I got put into foster care, right? And all of these societal things were happening. And I was like, no, 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 no. I need to find out where I come from and, the history so that I can define how I want to be identified and how I want to live the world. And so I started, continue to bring these different voices together. And then when I also looked at the list that I compiled, I said, I have to make sure underrepresented people from our community are represented. And that is, the Afro Latinx population, the queer population. But even beyond that, I wanted to tell stories from all across the US, right? I was like, okay, I want to make sure I'm getting a Dominican from Chicago's experience, because I always get the Dominican from New York experience. I want to get the Texan person, but they're not in Texas, right? They're like a transplant now in New York City. And so that is an interesting take. It's something different because they're not a native New Yorker. I wanted another Black Dominican to, be from a different state. So we have someone from Houston, from Austin, from El Paso. So, just making sure that it was as varied and as wide as possible to make sure that I was being as reflective as possible. And I want to say with the caveat that there's no way I could encapsulate the entire Latin American, countries and descendants in this one book. It's only 15 voices. So I like to preface that this is kind of like volume 1. There needs to be a volume 2, 3, 4, 5, because there are still so many intersectionalities missing from the story, but I settled on 15 because I knew we were going to tackle a lot of tough topics. We're talking about immigration, we're talking about mental health, religion, all these different things that are very, very, very heavy. But in addition to that, one of my favorite essays in the book is written by a brand new voice. His name is Khalil Haywood. He's Panamanian, and he just writes about being a Black Panamanian, growing up in Brooklyn, but then like traveling on an airplane to go to Panama in this Black town. And he's just having a wonderful summer. Like, there's no drama there's a little bit of history, so there's a little bit of drama, but for the most part, it's like such a fun, Black joy essay that talks about like food and shenanigans with family members. And I just thought, I was like, wow, this is something that needs to be included in this book, and so it was such a treat to weave together all of these various different voices. And I do want to say one more thing before I turn the mic back over to you to ask your next question. I get a lot of questions about, why did you include Evie Zaboy, who identifies as Haitian? Haiti does not consider themselves, Latinx. And I said, well, if you look at the history, right?
Yeah.
Literally you cross over and you're in Dominican Republic. So why wouldn't Haiti be considered a Latin American country? And so I love Evie Zaboy's essay, Haitian Sensation is what it's called, because she takes you through what it was like growing up in New York City to be Haitian, right? And the different terms that she learned, and how in certain neighborhoods people were like, oh, you don't want to be Haitian, right? Like, they're icky. And then like it progresses and it's like, oh, well, what was the other term? Hispanic was a term in like the 90s, before we got, the Latino, Latina, even, Latinx, which came way later. And so all of these different terms started to pop up. And I like to tell people that for 1 year, around that same time that I identified as an Afro-Latina, Evie Zaboy identified as an Afro-Latina. It was a short period of time, but then you read her essay and she's like, I did the history, and technically Haiti is, a Latin American country, and I could claim that if I want to, but I have decided to, claim Haitian, that I am Haitian. And I just found that to be beautiful, because I think we all have the power to identify however the heck we want, no matter what society tells you, no matter what these individuals on the social media sphere that are like, oh, don't use Latinx anymore. What is a Latinx? Well, if you want to use Latinx, use Latinx. If you want to use Latino, use Latino, Latina, Latine, whatever it is. I'm like, Latinidad is a joke because all of the different turns, I'm like, we know we're Latin American descendants or immigrants or, whatever it is. So as long as you know the history, you're good. You can identify however you want. I love when people are like, I'm Chicana or I'm Dominican, I'm this, I'm that. And I'm like, wonderful. That's how you identify. That's how I'm going to, respect it and make sure that I address you in that way.
Exactly. Perfect. Yeah. I think I struggled through the same thing of everybody trying to put you in a certain box. And I think at a certain point when you realize the box is based on them, not on you, and you can do whatever, you choose that. And I love, like with Mark Oshiro, it's like I don't have a lot in common with him as far as our ethnicity and background, but I identified with everything he said in his story. And,
Yes.
just, I mean, so it's like, even though, these stories are all universal in so many ways. And so I think I'm ready for your anthology number 2. so so with that in mind, because I think you're right. Like, I mean, we can't encompass everything, but if you were to do another one, what other authors would you want to work with? Because you
Oh,
worked with some
wow.
amazing authors here. I mean, they were
Yes,
all
I did. Oh man. Melissa Rivero is on my list. Carolina Robetis is on my list. Dalma uh, Figueroa. I think it's Janos Figueroa is the last name. She's on my list. There's another Honduran Garifuna writer. Her name is Sulma Arzu. She wrote Bad Here Does Not Exist. She's on my list. I mean, the list just goes really on and on. Adam Silvera, who's also from the Bronx, is, one of my favorite writers that I love to read. I would love for him to tell his story. There's just so many. I would also try to get a couple more poets, to maybe come over to the anthology. What I really loved about what I did here with this one is I mixed in YA, like traditional YA writers, some traditional poets, and then also traditional adult writers, like Naima Coster and Ingrid Rojas Frontera. Like, I was like, I want it all. I want this really, to be a book that speaks to both markets. I like to tell people it's really for all ages, because we're talking about a lot of different topics here that work for, a high school student, a college, student, a person who is just navigating the world on their own, people who feel lost. It works for people who want to learn more about, the Latinx community, but don't really know where to start. It just shows fully realized people. And it also shows, like you said, that even though you don't have a lot in common with some of the writers, you can like relate to some of the topics, to some of some of their experiences that they've had over the years, which I think is really important. And also, like, one of the key things that I wanted readers to take away from it. A lot of people were like, oh, that book isn't for me because I'm not Latinx. I'm like, oh no, but it is. Like this book is for everyone.
Yeah. Everyone can see something. And then the way you had, the poets, the YA, and that's what also made it fun to read,
Yes.
because you're hearing those different voices in a different way, and it was a lot of fun. So I really enjoyed it, and
Good.
so I'll be ready
Yeah.
for the next one. I also wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about the Bronx's literacy program.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So being a member of the Bronx, like I said, I was born in Brooklyn. New York, I lived there until I was 8 years old. And when I ended up in foster care, sort of migrated over to the Bronx. And what I have discovered about the Bronx is it's one of the poorest counties in, New York State, probably in the US. I'm pretty sure it's on that list. And so there were several resources lacking within the community. So growing up here, I never experienced an author visit. I never, dreamed of even becoming a published writer because I didn't think that that was a job that I could have. I didn't think it was a career that I could have. There were no bookstores in the Bronx when I was here growing up. We did get a Barnes and Noble later on that has since closed. And so I bought my books from street vendors, which shout out to street vendors. I love them so much. And they're always 80% to 90% immigrants, but they will hook you up. So like, respect, if there are anyone tuning in, like, I love me some street vendors, like entrepreneurs. That's really what it should be called,
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. But so, I've always been around books growing up, and to see that, once I graduated from college and landed an internship and then later on a full-time job in publishing as a publicist, I got to arrange author events and attend book festivals and literary conventions all over the US. And then I would always travel back home to the Bronx and wonder, why doesn't my community have something like this? And it was very frustrating. So you can imagine year after year, right, of being on the road several times throughout the year, hanging with writers, going to fabulous bookstores all across the country and being like, wow, I have a sense of FOMO because when I leave this place, I know what I'm missing out on. I'm missing out on that community building that you have when you walk into a bookstore. I'm missing out on engaging with wonderful booksellers. I'm missing out on the wonderful events that they host, because having a bookstore in your community, it's not just a retail space. It really is a community hub. It's where people come and gather and share space. It's historically where activists have come, to share ideas and really be change makers in their community and then even beyond their community. And so it's something I've been dying to have here in the Bronx. And so I said, what can I do to help make sure that other folks that were like little Saraceia, who probably loved books, enjoyed writing, or come from a family of oral storytellers like I did, and has not seen this representation, right? The little artistas, right, that are running around and they're like, oh, I did a little doodling, but my parents are telling me not to do it because it doesn't pay. So there are options. There's so much you could be doing. And so with the Bronx Is Reading literacy program, I bring in specifically authors of color and marginalized writers into low-income schools, and they present to the students, and it's a mix. So the Bronx Is Reading is a social good organization. So I make sure that all the kids that are present in that visit get a copy of the book. So that's whether it's through the school making a purchase, whether it's their parents making a purchase, or TBIR providing the books. Like, we make sure those kids walk away with a book because, due to these socioeconomic disadvantages in the Bronx, families cannot afford to buy paperback books, let alone a hardcover book. And so the work that I'm trying to do in my community is to really show them, like, you can read for pleasure, but also arm yourself with knowledge, because this is how we get out of poverty, right? This is how we negotiate contracts. This is how we, educate our elders, our young people, because the Bronx has a lot of challenges and issues. It's also the highest, borough here in New York City with a rate of asthma. It's very high, very high. Diabetes, it's just really bad. And I think it's because there's this disconnect between the literature and the understanding. And so I'm trying to tell people, like, yes, I'm pushing books. I want you to read for fun, but it's also a literacy program. I want you to understand what you're reading. I want you to comprehend. I want you to be able to really lead a life as a well-educated person, because it's really the young people that's going to move forward and change, what we adults are trying to change, but we can only take it so far. And so it's up to us to make sure our young people are very well educated, because those young people grow up to be adults who then have voting power and make decisions. So, I don't want to talk about critical race theory and things like that, but these are the things that, we have to make sure we're giving them all of the tools and not censoring, what they're reading and stuff like that, but instead, giving them books on topics, whether we agree with it or not. I know there's a huge debate right now across the country about these type of things, but if we don't give them the literature, it's like debates, right? When you have a debate with someone, you have to know the argument of the other side.
Right.
In order to make your rebuttal even stronger than what they're going to come at you with. And so I like to tell people that like, sure, maybe this is content that I personally don't agree with, but let me read up on it, because I need to know what's happening on I need to know what's happening on that other end.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is so important. We really need to teach our youth to be critical thinkers, to learn to think for themselves and make those choices for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the major work that the Bronx Is Reading is doing. We also like to have fun. So we have a book club. We like to uplift other Bronx writers, because there's also, I feel like when people are like, oh, like I said, we all want to identify with a group, right? We all are like, no, I'm a New Yorker, or I'm a Texan, or I'm a this, right? So I like to tell people, like, did you know this writer was from the Bronx? Like, a lot of people are raving about all of the Marvel content that we got this year. So I'm like, Stan Lee from the Bronx, I like to remind people of that. And they're like, oh, really? So, just so that they can have claim to something and kind of root and say, okay, well, if that author was from the Bronx and they wrote something, I think I could also, write something, or maybe be an artist and get it published. So really just trying to like inspire, them to create and become the next change makers in the world. We have a book festival. We pretty much try and do it all. And currently right now I am raising funds to open up a brick and mortar bookstore in the Bronx. So fingers crossed that happens in the next 2 years.
I hope so. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, like what you're working on now. So have you been working on that for a while?
I have been working on it for a while. We launched our crowdfund campaign last year at the end of the year. We raised some funds, but believe it or not, the Bronx is one of the poorest counties, but it's very expensive to lease commercial space. And so I find that as a barrier to be very fascinating. But we've made some movements. I've won some wonderful grants. So it's just all going into the pot for me to, hopefully secure a lease, and then one day be able to open up that brick and mortar bookstore. But in the interim, we do pop up bookstores across the Bronx at various different events. So like farmers markets and things like that, just trying to remind people that we're here. And we also host events and, like I said, school visits as well. And our online bookstore, which I should plug, the Bronx Is Reading books at .com.
Awesome. Yeah. So you're reaching a lot of different ways. So that's amazing. That's got to be hard though. So what are your future plans for writing? Or are you writing anything right now?
Yes, I am currently writing. I actually just posted on social media that it's been really tough to write. So I've been working on a bunch of essays over the last year and slowly revising them. So hopefully in the near future, maybe the next year, 2, 3, hopefully within 5 years at least, I'll have a solo essay collection. And it was just announced that I will be participating in 2 anthologies. One is a relit. It's a fantasy anthology, which all of the stories will sort of have a Latinx twist. So there are some people doing fairy tales and things like that. And then I'm editing a Black horror anthology that will be coming out in winter 2024. I'm a huge horror fan. I love horror. And one of the things that sucks is there's usually never any Black final girls. And so for those of you that don't know what a final girl is, that's basically like the character that survives at the end. And so in this anthology, the main character will be a Black girl, and the girl will survive at the end.
Good.
After
Good.
monster or, mischief and mayhem. It'll be.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Oh, did I
So
lose you? Okay, there you are.
I think we can still hear you. You were a little frozen, but we could still hear you. So that's always good. I always feel like it's important to know before I watch a movie that the dog doesn't die in it,
Right.
and that we have a happy ending in some kind. And it's
Yes,
important
yes.
to know, like, hey, you're not going to be disappointed at the end.
Exactly.
So you just want otherwise I won't watch it. But it's like, no, if it's not a happy ending, forget it.
Exactly. Nope, I agree.
Yeah. So I also wanted to ask you, like, what is the hardest part of writing for you?
The hardest part of writing these days is staying true to my writing ritual. I think before the pandemic, I would come home and write at my desk. But once, COVID took us by storm and everyone sort of had to work from home, my personal ritual of writing at my desk became the place where I work remotely. And so it's been very challenging to, tell my brain, now it's time for you, to write creatively. And so now I find that I have to go on retreats or, into a different space to sit and write because I don't know if people really think about this, but you get into a routine and you have this whole ritual of what you do, right? Maybe before you leave the house, when you're on your way to work, there are just all these certain things that you do along the way to make sure you have a good day. And so for me to have a good writing day, there were certain, times of day and spaces that I needed to be in, and my desk was my safe space. But I've been really struggling because for the last 2 years I didn't really get to travel anywhere. So it's been so hard to really be creative. But now, vaccination, boosters, and all of the wonderful shots, we're able to travel now. So I'm able to take little trips and sit and write. So I'm really excited about, the rest of 2022 and even 2023 to really get back into the nitty-gritty writing ritual.
Good. Yeah, the pandemic has changed a lot of our lives and our work life as well, quite a bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, Saraceia, I think you just muted yourself. So make sure yeah. But I just wanted to thank you so much for being a part of our program today, and for being part of our Latino Book Festival. We really appreciate it. Your book, Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed, 15 Voices from the Latino Diaspora. Yeah, we got it up there. I really love this book, and a lot of people did. I mean, a lot of people.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, our last author that we spoke with, Xochitl Gonzalez, she loves that book. So, and she's from Brooklyn.
Yay! Yeah, she's from Brooklyn. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to listen to me talk my talk. And thank you so much for hosting me and for creating space for us to talk about our stories. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, I think our stories are important. They're diverse and they are universal at the same time, and they're so important. So thank you for supporting it. Yeah.
Of course.
And for everyone watching out there, thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed our festival this year and hope to see you next year.